Permanent Ink by Maxine on AO3. Chapter 21. Wide green eyes, so much like Deku's, blinked at him as Midori Inkold pulled open the door. Katsuki tried not to immediately panic. Fuck. He'd really been hoping Deku would be the one to answer his knock. Oh, Katsuki! Inko sounded surprised to see him, but she hurriedly stepped back out of the way to allow him to enter. Honey, you're early. Was Izuku expecting you? Sorry, Katsule mumbled, as she shifted back inside. No, I just thought. Well, he didn't know what he thought, to be honest. He really should have texted the other boy before just showing up. Also, he was just realizing he hadn't brought anything with him this time. His parents would turn up with something sure, and had he come with them, it wouldn't have mattered. But he felt stupidly empty-handed now, even if Inko didn't seem to notice. She was busy glancing distractedly back over her shoulder. He went off to get ready. I think he just jumped into the shower. Double fuck. Katsuki fought back a wince. I can come back. He tried to offer, but Inko sunk back to look at him and quickly waved that off. No, don't be silly. Come in, come in. Can I get you something to drink? There was something in her voice that told Katsuki she wasn't quite as eager as she was trying to seem. It had been years since he'd probably seen her last, and probably longer since he'd actually spoken. But she was still Deku's fucking mom, and he knew Deku. So this overly casual, slightly too high-pitched tone she was stirring promptly set him on edge. The tense line on her shoulders didn't help any either. I'm okay, Katsuki said carefully, putting his own calm front and trying to figure out how the fuck he was supposed to act around her. She seemed shorter than he remembered, which was definitely just because he'd been through several growth spurts since the last time they were face to face. But she was also, rounder, which was new. Yet she still looked so much like Deku. That was damn near unrevealing. Inko was already bustling around the kitchen, so Katsuki toed off his shoes and wandered over that way. Whatever she was preparing smelled really fucking good. The air is thick with an aroma that somehow threw Katsuki back in time at least 10 years. I was making tea anyways, she said, pulling out a second cup to match the one that was already on the counter. You like tea, right? Sure, Katsuki said, then blatantly remembered to tack on quick. Thanks. Inka hummed, her attention a little overly focused on the not exactly difficult task of making tea. And Katsuki tried not to start fidgeting like he was a goddamn child. Can I help with anything? No, just relax, Inko said. Sit down, Katsuki, I'm fine. She paused suddenly, though, looking like she was hesitating for some reason, before turning around to face Katsuki completely. Then again, I did have some of your katsukun the other day. You're quite the cook. Maybe I should let you take over. Katsuki felt his cheeks go warm. I picked it up from my mom, he admitted. And my dad, I guess. Both of them? Inko nodded absently. She was sort of staring at him, which just made Katsuki want to fidget even more. Everything about this was so damn uncomfortable. You've gotten so tall, Inko eventually murmured, and Katsuki had no fucking clue how to respond to that. He ended just rubbing awkwardly at the back of his neck. Sometimes you forget, she continued. Seeing someone every day, watching them grow up, the changes don't always hit you when they happen. But now I go weeks without seeing Izuku, and he seems so different every time he comes home. And you? She gave him a wordery sort of smile. Alarm spiked in Katsuki's gut, because it was one thing when Deku cried, but if his mother started up with the fucking waterworks, then he was legit probably going to bail. What the fuck? It has been years since we last saw each other, hasn't it? Not since. Katsuki stalled, his words piled up and getting stuck in his throat. making him feel like he was choking on nothing. Not since. What? Not since he decided schoolyard scrubbles weren't enough? Not since he consciously crossed the line between being a childish brat and a bully asshole? Before junior high, he finished, lamely. I think. Hmm. Inko's eyes lowered. That sounds about right. She looked around the kitchen for a moment, one hand resting behind on the counter, fingers tapping anciently. Well, it's good to see you again. Bullshit, Katsuki thought. She couldn't even look at him as she said that. This was such a bad idea. This was such a fucking bad idea. He felt like things were already unraveling and he didn't know how to put them back together. Would Deku be pissed if he exploded himself off the balcony and hid in the mountains for a while? Thanks for inviting us, he forced out, somewhat strange, wrangling up every last ounce of decent manners his dad had tried to cram into him growing up. We're happy to have you, Inko replied, sounding just stilted. Silence fell between them, lasting just long enough for it to become noticeable, and then she sighed and put her gaze away from the wall to glance at Katsuki again. Izuku's certainly excited about it. He's been talking about you a lot lately. That felt accusatory somehow, though Katsuki was almost positive that was just his stupid brain playing tricks on him. Something shifted on Inko's face then. Her expression seemed to soften, the slight furrow that had been present between her brows smoothing out. Katsuki, honey, really, please sit down. I feel like we're having some sort of Western standoff. Shit, sorry, Katsuki said, rushed, moving quickly towards the kitchen table where he and Deku had laid everything bare only a couple days ago. He winced as soon as he was settled, faintly hearing his own words, and he murmured again, sorry. Inko shook her head. I'm friends with your mother, she said fondly, turning away briefly to retrieve the mugs of tea, then moved to sit across from Katsuki. I can handle a little coarse language. Katsuki accepted one of the cups from her with a quiet murmur of thanks, immediately gulping down to hide the fact that he didn't know what the fuck to say next. Luckily, Inko didn't let the quiet overwhelm them again and kept the conversation going easily enough. Izuku had so much fun on your hike yesterday, she said, that sort of forced casualness returning to her voice. He couldn't stop talking about it this morning. Ha, fucking hell. What a damn nerd. Was it the hike that was fun, or the shit that had happened on the hike? Natsuki felt like his ears were burning, and he hoped desperately that it wasn't noticeable. Fuck knows what Inko would make of him blushing right now. Good fucking God. We had decent weather for it, he said, which was just about the most boring answer he could have possibly come up with, surely. The hell was wrong with him? He'd always used to love joining you and your dad when you were younger. I know. Katsuki let the corner of his mouth tug upwards. I took him on a real trail this time, though, not one of those baby paths around the park. Inko actually cracked a small grin at that. It's nice to see you two getting along again. Her eyes lowered briefly once more, and her hands tightened around her mug. But she looked back up almost immediately, a familiar sort of determination struggling to face in the deeps of her gaze. I like to think, she said slowly, looking right at Katsuki in a way that had him unconsciously straighten up in his seat, that you were on your way to becoming friends again before your birthday. Well, Katsuki started to speak, about to say some bullshit about their work studies, probably, when the meaning behind her words pierced through him like a goddamn bullet. He actually felt the blood drain from his face, his eyes helplessly going wide as he stared back at her, mouth hanging open a bit. Inko calmly brought her mug to her lips, taking a sip. Maybe he was mistaken, jumping to conclusions. She wasn't actually implying that she knew. Am I wrong? Inko asked, one eyebrow lifting as she peered at Katsuki over the top of her cup. Katsuki tried to find words, tried to literally say fucking anything, but he couldn't get his goddamn body to work. He was pretty sure his stomach had dropped straight through the floor, and there was nothing but static in his brain. Inko was still watching him, expectantly, but another beat passed and she let out a little huff, her gaze drifting away. It's complicated, she said, sounding as if she was relenting something. Complicated, but not bad. His words. Oh. Deku had said that to her, hadn't he? That night. His birthday. He'd been on the phone with her when Katsuki had finally managed to fuck up and force himself to talk to him. It's complicated, Mom, Inko said again, her voice pitched a bit lower as if she was trying to imitate Deku. I might know who my soulmate is, but I can't tell you right now. She looked back at him. Katsuki, who else could it possibly be? I don't. Katsuki swallowed, then drew in a shaky breath. Fuck, okay, so this was happening. He steered himself, hands dropping away from the table to grip at the edge of his seat. Izuku was going to tell you. Did you tell him not to? Inko asked, brows drawing down a tiny bit, and Katsuki shook his head. No, he said quickly. No, he was just waiting for a good time to do it, I think. I only just told my parents last night. His heart was pounding. Holy shit. It felt so surreal talking to Deku's mom about this. It was weird, but almost a relief. He hadn't been expecting her to drop such a fucking bomb, that was for sure. Here, Katsuki had been thinking he'd have to wait for her to find out, and then he'd have to walk on eggshells around her until the truth came out. But if she already fucking knew, that was that. Then now he had no choice but to deal with it, and he'd always worked better when he had a clear path forward. I was wondering if Mitsuki knew, Inko murmured. I didn't think she'd keep something like that from me. Katsuki snorted before he could stop himself. She tried calling you almost immediately. I had to tell her knock it off. Inko smiled faintly, but she wasn't looking at him. A moment passed before she spoke again. I guess Izuku didn't know before his birthday either, then. He didn't tell him? No, Katsuki said, voice quiet. I wanted to work through it first. A troubled expression was starting to wash over Inko's face. Katsuki's chest tightened, distress turning his blood cold in his veins. It was just a lot a lot to come to terms with, he continued in a rush. I needed to figure it out. I see, Inko said, her voice carefully level. Katsuki's hands tightened where they were gripping his chair, and suddenly, unexpectedly, he felt a spark of annoyance flare in his gut. He looked down before he could pin Inko with the glare he knew he was forming on his face, directing it at the table between them instead. He wasn't sure if it was what his mother had said coming back to him, or if he was just plain fucking tired of bracing himself to deal with the disapproval he kept expecting everyone to have. But he was finally realized that he just really didn't care. Fuck it. Deku's mom would be as pissed as she wanted. It wasn't going to stop Katsuki from being with him. Sure, he didn't want to be the battle, but he was willing to fight if he had to. He wasn't about to let Deku go before they'd even given the soulmate thing an honest chance. I'm sorry if you're mad, he said in a low, steady voice. And I get it if you are, but I'm not giving Deku up. I can't. Katsuki drew in a sharp breath and forced himself to lift his head, finding Inko's staring eyes across the table. I don't know how to be me without him. He's never not been in my life, and maybe that used to piss me off, but it's different now. I want to be with him. He's important to me, and as long as he wants me around, I'm not planning on going anywhere. So I really fucking hope you can accept this, because it'll probably fucking crush Izuku, if you don't. A beat passed, and then, feeling vaguely horrified with himself, and not a little hysterical, he murmured, "Sorry for cursing." That was a very real possibility that Katsuki was about to explode in a non-quirk related way. He could hear his own fucking heartbeat right now. It was so damn loud, in a manic kind of energy, thumping beneath his skin. He was practically vibrating with it, but he didn't try to shove it all down, making himself hold steady, refusing to look away from Inko. She blinked at him, but was otherwise a blank canvas for a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. Katsuki's knees bounced beneath the table, and then, all at once, the tension in Inko's shoulders bled away. "Katsuki," she said softly, a gentle smile beginning to curve around her face. "I'm not upset." Katsuki sagged back into his seat, exhausted as though he just ran 20 marathons in a row, and Inko laughed lightly. There was something relieved in the sound of it, maybe even a little disbelieving. "I didn't realize." She dragged a weary hand over her face, then rested her cheeks against it as she peered back at Katsuki. "I owe you an apology, I suppose." "You really don't," Katsuki said immediately, because that was probably about the most backwards thing he could ever hear in his entire goddamn life. But Inko shook her head. "No, you're misunderstanding. I didn't." She paused for a moment, glancing away briefly. "When Izuku said he couldn't share his words with me, I honestly didn't think much about it. It was a little strange, maybe, since it sounded like he did have a good idea who his soulmate was, and I couldn't think of a reason he wouldn't want to tell me. But he's a teenage boy." She shrugged a little, turning back to flash Katsuki an amused grin. "I figured I shouldn't be surprised if he just wanted to keep it private. But the rest of what he said, and about how it was complicated, but not bad, I was curious about that. I wasn't going to pester him, though, but when your name started coming up again, Katsuki felt his face go warm, but he didn't try to say anything. Apparently, he used his brain's capability for words with the last decoration of his. He felt emotionally wiped out all over again. "Izuku used to talk about you all the time," Inko continued, her stare going distant. "Even during your rougher times, he was always in awe of you. You were always doing something impressive with your quirk or acting a test in school. He just wanted to be around you, and when you were both little, I couldn't make him understand." She hesitated there, and something in Katsuki's stomach sank. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. "No one's ever obligated to like someone else," she said quietly. "You can't force someone to be friends with you." "But Izuku wanted to be your friend so badly, even when you made it clear that wasn't what you wanted. He kept trying. I think that made everything worse." "It wasn't his fault," Katsuki started to say, but Inko was quick to interrupt him. "No, I'm not saying it was." Her voice was a tad sharp. Katsuki tried not to flinch. "But everyone lacks the emotional maturity at that age to understand the complexity that relationships can have. I might not have been happy with how you handled it, but you were just a child. You're trying to set boundaries the only way you knew how, and you didn't listen." Inko perked her lips for a moment. "It hurt to watch. So whenever he started mentioning you again, I get worried. And for it to happen so soon after he got his words, I couldn't help wondering. He seemed so happy when I spoke to him about his birthday, though. Then, when he came home on Saturday, he wasn't." Katsuki let out a breath. "Uraraka found out the day before. It didn't really go that well." Inko nodded. "Well, that's how it goes sometimes, I guess. She's a sweet girl. I'm sure she'll come around." "Sweet." Katsuki barely refrained from snorting. "Anyways," her hands twisted together as she looked directly at him. "Izuku was in such a mood for a couple days, and then the next thing I know, he's texting me at work to let me know you're staying the night." She tipped her hands, watching him grizzled sort of way. "I knew you were going hiking, but you hadn't stepped foot in the apartment in years." Katsuki, "And then suddenly you were here. cooking dinner, spending the day with Izuku, and he was so happy. I think that's when it all clicked into place. Inko huffed a little laugh. Complicated indeed. He really was going to tell you. I believe you, Inko said. It's not that I need him to tell me, I just. She trailed off, and something a little remorseful started to creep in around the edges of her expression. I jumped to conclusions. That's why I owe you an apology. Honey, I know better than anyone that soulmates don't always work out. That's just. You have a certain set of words on your arm. It doesn't mean everything is magical and it's going to be perfect. I thought Izuku was leaping at the chance to be around you again, but I didn't know where you stood. I didn't think you were interested in the way he was, and I was scared he was going to accept whatever scraps of affection you were offering up. And Izuku deserves better than that. He deserves more. He deserves everything, Katsuki said quietly. He was reeling a bit as he took in what Inko said. That she wasn't angry about Katsuki being Deku's soulmate, but just concerned that Katsuki wouldn't love him enough? That was stupid as fuck. Katsuki would love the shit out of that nerd. Just watch him. Inko's eyes were starting to look dewy again. I'm glad you feel that way. I guess you really did do some soul searching these past few months. It was important, Katsuki murmured. You're right, though. What you said before? He reached for his forgotten cup of tea, needing something else to look at. I think we've been on the way to becoming friends again for a while. I understand him better now, and we're partners. But my words were still a fucking shock. I can imagine, Inko said, somewhat dryly, and Katsuki couldn't help the self-deprecating, almost grin-like thing that flashed across his face, there 1 second and gone the next. I really thought you were going to be furious, he admitted, turning his mug in his hand. Inko made a considering sort of sound. That wouldn't do anyone any good, she said slowly. You didn't choose your words, and neither did Izuku. Besides, like I said, Izuku talks about you. There had been some lulls over the years, but I've heard enough about your explicits at UA to know you've grown up. There was an amused quality to her tone as she spoke now. Her eyebrows arched as she gave Katsuki a look. Mitsuki and I talk about you two all the time, and she always insisted you would, She cleared her throat, lifting her hand to cover the way the corners of her mouth worked upwards. Get your head out of your ass eventually? Her words. Katsuki grumbled under his breath, sitting back in his seat and folding his arms across his chest. Old hag, you talk about us? You're our kids, of course we do. She sighed a little. Not always good at conversations, but it looks like we've made it through the other side with relatively little damage done. Well, fuck. She wasn't necessarily wrong, but Katsuki was also about 10,000% sure she was blissfully unaware of the amount of irreversible damage Katsuki could have done had Deku actually listened to him. She hadn't asked what their words were yet, though, and Katsuki wasn't going to tell her. They could deal with that another time. Or Deku could tell her, since he hadn't really gotten to tell anyone anything. It all seemed to just keep happening without him being involved. Katsuki winced a little as he realized that, and Inko seemed to take it in a different way as she gave him another look. I'm sure it's not anything I'll have to worry about anymore going forward, she said, green eyes intensely focused on Katsuki, and he quickly shook his head. That shit's definitely over, he said, and Inko seemed satisfied with that as she brought her mug to her lips and finished off her tea. I'm sorry I was an asshole to him to begin with. Thank you for saying that, Katsuki. I'm sorry I wrongly assumed how you felt about him. She went quiet for a moment, and Katsuki shifted, wondering if Deku was almost fucking done getting ready or what. How long did it take this idiot to shower and throw some clothes on? This is the only thing I'm going to say, Inko spoke up again. And I want you to understand that I'm not coming from a place of doubt or blame or anything like that, but I know how happy you can make him. She gave Katsuki a sad sort of smile. Unfortunately, I also know how unhappy you can make him. So all I ask is that you try your best not to. Katsuki didn't have a response for that, and it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of his lungs for a moment. So he just nodded. It was surprisingly hard hearing her comment on how easily he could fuck all of this up. He wasn't going to let that happen, though. I'll say the same thing to Izuku, don't worry, Inko added. It takes two people to make a relationship work. It's not all on you. Something she said earlier suddenly came back to him, and Katsuki gave her a curious look. I didn't know you and, shit. Holy shit. How goddamn blatant was he? Thinking he could just ask? Inko's eyebrows arched. You didn't realize Hisashi and I are soulmates? She said, knowingly. And Katsuki hesitated before giving her another nod. Because he's not here, right? He's probably been gone as far as you can remember, so I'm not surprised. She sighed, and there was something heartbreaking about the look on her face. We already knew each other when we got our words, you know? A little bit like you and Izuku, so I guess you could say we were high school sweethearts. She huffed out a humorous little laugh. We got together because we thought we were supposed to, and we were happy enough, but we wanted different things. I wanted a family, he wanted to focus on his work. She felt silent, and Katsuki tried not to squirm uncomfortably. Okay, so maybe trying to ask his boyfriend's mom about her missing husband hadn't been the brightest move, but it was too late to take it back now. Being a match for someone doesn't mean you'll have the same dreams, Inko said finally. You can fit well together, but still find that life takes you in completely different directions. I didn't mean to project that onto you, though, Katsuki. I really didn't. I'm overly cautious, I suppose. I think I would have been no matter who Izuku's soulmate ended up being. Don't worry about it, Katsuki said, the words awkward on his tongue. I'm not really into the bullshit fairy tale anger either. I know it's ain't like that easy. Inko's met his eyes across the table, and for a few seconds they just stared at each other. Weirdly enough, against all odds, Katsuki thought that maybe Inko actually understood him, that they understood each other. What a fucking concept. She leaned across the table a moment later, and Katsuki found himself sitting forward, putting himself close enough for her to reach out and cup his cheeks. It was a familiar gesture, something she had done all the time when he and Deku had been kids. It really is good to see you again, she said, with a smile that actually reached her eyes for the first time that day, and Katsuki allowed his own expression to mellow out, softening as he grinned back at her. Yeah, you too. Inko let go of him and pushed herself from the table. I should probably get back to it. The meal isn't going to finish itself. Do you want to go grab Izuku? She dropped her hands from her hips, throwing a look towards the entrance of the kitchen. I don't know what's taking him so long. Izuku! She bellowed out abruptly, and in a way only Mom seemed to be able to. Katsuki jolted in his seat, despised himself. What? Deku yelled back, faintly muffled since he was down the hall and presumably behind a closed door. What on earth are you doing? Hurry up! Katsuki's here! There was a pause, then another slightly higher pitched, What? Something thumpled, followed by a banging sound, and Katsuki snickered. I'll go get him, he said. He stood and walked out of the kitchen just in time to see Deku skittling around the corner from the hall, dressed in a pair of gym shorts and an old raggedy t-shirt, his wet hair pulled back into a messy ponytail on the top of his head. Chan, he cried, jerked to a halt in front of him, eyes darting wildly over his face. It felt like you were here, but I thought it was just being crazy. How long? Katsuki interrupted him with a kiss, swooping forward to plant his mouth on the other boy's, unable to help himself when Deku looked so damn good. Okay, fine. Maybe he missed him too. There was something ballooning in his chest, that giggly, almost desperate, fond thing he was getting used to feeling whenever Deku was around. Deku kissed him back, unthinkingly, eyelid fluttering shut, and it didn't last long or anything. But he still looked a bit dazed when Katsuki pulled back. Unfortunately, that only lasted about half a second, and then his expression morphed into something more alarmed. Kachan, my mom, he hissed out. Cheeks flushed as he leaned around Katsuki to peer into the kitchen. Inko had her back to them as she fussed over something at the stove, and Katsuki's shoulders sagged with relief. She knows. Katsuki cut him off. Deku stared at him, and Katsuki quickly added, I didn't tell her. She figured it out. She knows. Deku repeated blankly. Guess she clued in from what you couldn't stop blabbing this morning? Katsuki said dryly, and the flush in Deku's cheeks turned into an even deeper red. Is she? Deku trailed off, his brows furrowing, and Katsuki watched as a determined glint flashed in his eyes, and then he pushed past Katsuki, marching into the kitchen. Katsuki did his best not to listen as they started up in harsh conversations, turning patiently away from them to give them some privacy. He pulled out his phone and pretended he was looking at something on it, but his gaze kept accidentally flickering to the side, checking on them, taking in their body language and making sure something wasn't about to go horribly wrong. He didn't know how it could at this point, but still, it certainly seemed like Inko had basically given them the green light to go ahead with their whole thing. I just want you to be happy, baby, he heard Inko say softly, and then glanced around. She had lifted her hand up to cut Deku's face, as she'd done to him just a few moments ago. Deku looked like he was about to start crying. That was hardly surprising. A second later, they were clutching each other as they hugged. Deku was so much taller than his mom now. It was almost weird to observe. Katsuki could remember when Inko used to tower above both of them, when they could barely come up to her hips as they ran around making nuisance of themselves. She was short enough now that her cheeks pressed against Deku's chest, and he had his own face buried in her hair. Katsuki turned away again. In only a few more moments, a quiet murmuring had passed before Inko said loudly, You're not wearing that, are you? You bought you new clothes. Deku spurted. What? I was trying to pick something out, and then you said Kachan was here, so I panicked and threw this on. It's not like you gotta dress up, Katsuki said over his shoulders. It's just my folks. Exactly, Deku said desperately, and Katsuki barked out a laugh. What, are you trying to make a good impression? I'm telling you, you don't gotta worry about it. Deku was staring at him now, though Katsuki shifted, provoking back in their direction, and he watched as Deku's eyes dropped to drag over his entire body. You're dressed up? He said quietly, acting almost accusatory. You, Kachan. Katsuki felt his face go hot. I did not. Oh my god. I didn't. Shut up, Deku. You look really good, though. Deku had his hands pressed against his cheeks as he gave Katsuki a pouty sort of glare. That's so not fair. What the hell? Katsuki murmured, shoulders hunched up near his jaw. It's not a big deal. They're just clothes. You do look very nice, Inko commented, slightly, and Katsuki groaned before he could stop himself. Maybe you could help Izuku find an outfit? Katsuki blinked, looking at Deku. Sure. Deku blinked back at him, then started shuffling forward. My room is. I remember where your room is, Deku, Katsuki said, following after him. Door open, Izuku, Inko called, and they both froze. Oh my god, Deku said again, voice barely higher than a whisper. And then he yelled back to her, We live in a dorm, Mom! You're not there right now, are you? My house, my rules. For fuck's sakes, Deku grumbled, and Katsuki's heart tripped all over itself. Deku reached out to grab his wrist and pulled him the rest of the way to his room. He pushed the door closed behind them, and for a second Katsuki thought he was actually going to ignore what his mother had said, but ended up leaving it opened a crack, though he looked slightly embarrassed about doing so. Katsuki snorted. Nerd, he said, way too affectionately. Jerk who dressed up to meet my mom? Deku shot back at him, and Katsuki couldn't help glaring at that. Come on, help me. I'm meeting my boyfriend's parents. I want to look nice, too. Boyfriend. Katsuki thought it, of course. His mom had said it, and he sort of latched onto the idea. Hell, he even referred to Deku that way when he was talking to fucking Todoroki. But the truth was, it hadn't come up at all yesterday when they were hiking. They hadn't discussed slapping a label on other than soulmates onto the growing thing between them. So hearing Deku referred to him that way now was a lot. Everything felt like a lot of a sudden. Katsuki wasn't quite abruptly overwhelmed, and the feeling hadn't sparked up so quickly that it felt lightning and almost swept his feet. He couldn't pinpoint it for a second. Sure, why was there a burning behind his eyes and a lump in his throat? But Deku called out to him softly, reached a hand to palm the sides of his neck, and Katsuki just fucking collapsed forward against him. Deku, he croaked, arms wrapping around his waist, because he was allowed to do that. He didn't have to hide from fucking anything despite Deku's mom being just down the hall, and holy shit. Holy shit, he could actually have this. Deku wrapped his own arms around Katsuki's shoulders, one hand cradling the back of his head. Are you okay? He asked quietly, and Katsuki nodded where his face was pressed into the curve of Deku's neck. Yeah, he grunted. You? I'm fine. Deku chuckled a little. I'm not the one about to cry for some reason. I'm not crying, Katsuki mumbled, which was partially a lie because his eyes did feel sort of damp. God damn it. And you're a fucking liar. You were just crying all over your mom. I was happy, Deku murmured. And relieved, I guess? Ah, that's what it was. Relief. Yeah, Katsuki breathed out, his arms tightening around Deku. Me too. I told you it would be okay. I didn't believe you, Katsuki said, honestly. Deku combated a hand through his hair, quiet as a few seconds trickled by. I know, he said eventually. I would have fought for you, though, if it'd gone badly. I didn't want you to have to. Katsuki pulled back away, swiping at his cheeks with the back of his hands. It didn't feel wet, at least. Fuck, I didn't think I was gonna have, like, an actual conversation with your mom today. Shit was awkward. Well, I don't know you were coming over so quickly, Deku said, pointedly, and Katsuki huffed. How long have you been here, anyways? Hours, Katsuki replied, in a dramatic sort of way. Deku snorted. Poor planning on your part. Shut up, asshole. A pout tugged at his lips. I wanted to see you. Fucking sue me. Deku twitched at that, tipping forward briefly and then pausing like he was trying to hold himself back. And then he must have decided, fuck it, because he was lurching towards Katsuki in the next second to hug him again, which only lasted for a moment before he pulled back just enough to give himself room to push up onto his tippy toes and seal their mouth together. Without the excuse of Deku's mom lurking behind them, it took them quite a bit longer to pull themselves apart this time. Kachan, Deku said eventually, in between kisses, his hands curled around the open edges of Katsuki's shirt. Kachan, Kachan, I still need to get dressed. Katsuki hummed at the back of his throat, pressing forward away again, seeking the heat that came from Deku's tongue stroking along his own. It was still a little unbelievable that he could just do this now, that he even wanted to, that Deku wanted to do it with him. It had come so far, and while there was still a part of Katsuki that was still struggling under the weight of the past regret, the rest of him was filled with a wholly different kind of ache, with a deep need. He burned with the urge to be as close as Deku as possible. He wanted to be wrapped around him forever, and he was so intensely, stupidly attached to this nerd. Chan, Deku said again, laughing as he broke away, palms flat against Katsuki's chest now. Your parents are gonna be here soon. Fuck 'em, Katsuki grumbled, and he let Deku push him back. Just wear whatever, seriously. What you have on is fine. Deku gave him a flat, unamused look. They literally design clothes for a living, and I'm pretty sure this shirt has a hole in it somewhere. Katsuki heaved out a unappalled sigh. Fine, he said, and then trampled over Deku's bed, where it seemed half of his closet had been dumped. There was a pile of new shirts as well as a tag still on them, probably all wrinkled now. Wow, Deku was a fucking mess. He snickered before he could stop himself, which just made the other boy pout. Kachan! Alright, come on. Katsuki would never pretend to be some kind of shitty fashionista just because his parents were in the business, mostly because he didn't fucking care, but it was hardly difficult putting random ass articles of clothing together and judging whether it looked like hot garbage or not, particularly when he was working with a fucking pair of jeans that would literally go with any shirt Deku had digged out of his closet. It wasn't goddamn rocket science. Deku thanked him approximately 1,000,000 times anyways, as they stood crowded around the sink in the bathroom. He was beaming at Katsuki in a way of the reflection of the mirror, dressed in a dark plaited button down Katsuki had tossed at him, with the sleeves rolled up as he instructed. Katsuki was standing just behind him, hands combing through the green hair as he worked some of his hair into a half ponytail at the back of his head. It still wasn't quite long enough to recuperate entirely, which meant there was flyaways everywhere and wild strands that refused to stay captured in the hairband. But Katsuki thought it looked better like that anyways. Are you gonna keep growing this out? Don't know. Do you think I should? Katsuki shrugged, his cheeks pinkening. It's your damn hair. But you like it long, huh? Deku grinned in an annoying way. You like playing with it. I'd like it however, Katsuki murmured, tugging at one of his curls and making Deku stick his tongue out at him. Because it's you. Sap, Deku murmured, and Katsuki hooked an arm around his stomach, pulling him close so he could smack a kiss to his jawline. Yup, he peered into the mirror, meeting Deku's gaze. Ready? Yeah. Deku turned his head so he could look back at Katsuki's directly. His eyes were bright as he smiled. I'm ready. Inko's voice. I didn't know what to give her as a voice, and I still don't like the voice I picked out for her, but like, I don't know what else to do, so that's her voice now. Also, goddamn, acting her was the hardest thing I have ever done in my acting career. Harder than having to run away from zombies, harder than having to flirt with a zombie on live stage, harder than having to break up with someone on live stage, harder than goddamn pretending to die from radiation poisoning on live stage, and harder than, actually no, it was not harder than being backstage manager. Backstage manager was a bitch. Did I love it? Yes, I loved being backstage and being crew and not actually an actor on stage for once. Was it a bitch? Yes, because some actors like to just disappear and go on walks, you know? And like, you know, oh my god, it's your time. Where are they? They're supposed to be on stage. Where are you? Oh my god, you mean to tell me that they were on a 5-minute walk and they got here 5 minutes late? Oh my god. I wanted to murder someone. Anyways, small rant. But she was so hard to act. I'm sorry. She was a pain in the ass to act. I'm glad I somewhat got her all right. As always, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, have a wonderful day or night. Join our community Discord server, link is in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.